From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Monday, June 2, 2025. There are fears China could launch an invasion of Taiwan, triggering a global conflict. Cooperation on security and military exercises between Australia and the United States has been bumped up in anticipation of such an event. The coalition says it's open to striking a deal with the government on its proposed superannuation tax, but only if Treasurer Jim Chalmers drops Labor's tax on unrealised capital gains. That exclusive story is live right now at theaustralian.com.au. The New South Wales Police Unit tasked with solving cold case murders won't share crucial documents and information with victims' families. And it's all because of a podcast by The Australian that exposed a murderer. Today, why police are gun-shy about podcast investigations after the global success of The Teacher's Pet. In 2021, Kelly Slater-Regan spoke on the phone with Detective Inspector Nigel Warren, the boss of the New South Wales Police Unsolved Homicide Unit. Kelly is herself a former cop, but this wasn't a chinwag about her time in the force. Nope, Kelly had questions about the status of the investigation into the murder of her second cousin, the notorious gangster Johnny Regan, who was assassinated in a Marrickville backstreet in 1974. The crime has gone unsolved for more than half a century, and it's investigated in The Australian's newest podcast series, The Gangster's Ghost. Kelly was on a quest to uncover evidence that might finally unmask the 3 or 4 shooters who pulled the trigger on that September day in 1974. And the homicide file held tightly by the cold case unit within the New South Wales Police Force was a crucial piece of the puzzle.
And then he said, that we probably wouldn't get the homicide file because it's deemed to still be an active case.
Yep.
And he said, they're never suspended. They're just sitting there waiting for more information.
It was a blow for Kelly, who, like many members of his family, has been haunted by Johnny Regan's criminal reputation. They want to know, once and for all, if it's deserved.
And I said, so when was the review done? And he said, we did an investigation into the death in 2004. And then in 2016, the matters were reviewed again. And they plan on reviewing them every 5 to 10 years. And I said, nobody from my family was contacted.
But here's the thing. If that 37-minute phone call had happened just a few years earlier, the outcome might have been very different.
And then he said, we're a bit gun-shy giving out information because there was a podcast where the next of kin did a podcast on Lynette Dawson.
The Australian's podcast, The Teacher's Pet, revealed in 2018 that Lynette Dawson, who's now known by her maiden name, Lynette Sims, had been murdered by her husband, Chris Dawson, at their Bayview home in 1982. It was a global smash hit, thrusting the mystery of what happened to the young mum into the spotlight. Chris Dawson was arrested and charged with Lynette's murder in December of 2018. He was convicted by Justice Ian Harrison in 2022, following a long legal fight for a permanent stay of proceedings.
Christopher Michael Dawson on the charge that on or about 8 January 1982 at Bayview, or elsewhere in the state of New South Wales, you did murder Lynette Dawson. I find you guilty. You may sit down.
Dawson is currently serving a 24-year sentence for the crime, but maintains his wife left their home on the Northern Beaches of her own accord. He's applied for special leave to appeal his conviction in the High Court, arguing he suffered a forensic disadvantage in proving his innocence due to the almost 4-decade delay in bringing charges. The Unsolved Homicide Unit is also at the centre of Hedley Thomas's latest investigative podcast for The Australian. It probes the 1993 disappearance of Lennox Head mother Bronwyn Winfield, and family members like Bronwyn's brother Andy Reid say they've been left out of the loop by police too.
Basically said, well, their hands are tied, we can't do any more than what we've done and we don't have any new evidence. they've got no intention of putting any more work into it.
The New South Wales Police told The Australian they conducted a review into Johnny Regan's murder earlier this year, and they say there's not enough new evidence to justify formally reopening the investigation. We've used AI to bring that police statement to life.
The case remains open under State Crime Command's Homicide Squad Unsolved Homicide team, where it continues to be actively monitored for any new information or evidence that could assist in advancing the investigation. Police remain committed to providing regular updates to the victim's family, whilst also ensuring the integrity of the investigation is preserved and that no potential future investigative avenues are compromised.
Look, this is not a problem I have not encountered before. Being a police reporter of a certain vintage, I have grown up with what you could only call a perennial disconnect between journalists who are pursuing matters involving the police and the police themselves. And I understand that. I understand its evolution.
Matthew Condon is a senior reporter with The Australian and the host of the Gangster's Ghost podcast.
However, in 2025, we're in a situation where the game has changed completely, certainly from a journalistic perspective. And with the advent specifically of podcasting, whereby a journalist now has a platform where they can indeed examine a case over many hours of audio. Behind those hours of audio are many, many hundreds of thousands of words of script, hundreds of interviews with people, a very, very deep dive into subjects. So you have the evolution of technology, which is providing storytelling on a depth and breadth that has never been possible before. And you have, in my view, and it's not a criticism, but you have the police who have stood still as the technology has marched forward beyond them and out of sight of them, I believe. So something's not working. It's no longer a feasible relationship because we are seeing stories of great depth and research that really require, on behalf of the public, require a response. And that gulf no longer applies or just appears to be either ignorant, stubborn, or imprudent. I think that there needs to be a sort of détente somewhere in the middle whereby we can assist each other. I mean, the ambition is the same. Resolution for the public, for society at large, resolution for the families of victims, which is the most pertinent. And I think if we're all heading towards the same target, we could in fact help each other.
So, is it loyalty or a lack of resources that's preventing police from moving these cold case investigations forward?
Their work schedule is utterly relentless, 24/7, 365 days a year, and they should be really congratulated, if not revered, for the work they do on our behalf. So just let me make that very clear. But I'll give you a specific example with my research with the Gangster's Ghost. Kelly Slater Regan and I have been working on this for over 4 years. 4 years is a long time to work on a single story. And in those 4 years, you talk to an enormous volume of people. The thing with the Regan case is it might be 50 years, but there are still people alive with brilliant memories, with stories, with anecdotes, and with information, as we've discovered, that fills in the picture even after all these years. But that requires patience, it requires the time itself, and the police are permanently on a mouse wheel trying to resolve hundreds, if not thousands, of issues. But the podcast then allows us to establish the background, to, lay out the research and then present the findings. I do understand the issue when, we ask for cooperation and information and they're just in this unending forward-moving frenzy of their own work. I've discovered with these cold cases of some vintage, and certainly with the Gangster's Ghost and the Regan case, certainly with the teacher's pet, and certainly with the Bronwyn case, in all three, you have a scenario whereby newer generations of police are unfortunately put in the position whereby they are having to deal with sometimes shocking ineptitude of prior investigators 30, 40, 50 years ago. But you will not find a police officer who will disparage the work of their predecessors, because it's fellow members of a great tradition in terms of the police and detective work. And I totally understand that. But often this has to do with not wishing to lift the rusted piece of corrugated iron because you're afraid to see what's underneath it. And most of the time they know what that is. And it is a failure of initial investigators, be it through a lack of technology, be it through a lack of knowledge, or just critical errors that were made back in the day, that all then becomes a factor in why one should not release certain information, especially historical information, because it can emerge as a discredit to the grand tradition of the force itself.
Coming up, inside Kelly Slater Regan's search for the truth about her gangster cousin. Kelly Slater Regan applied to join the New South Wales Police Force on a dare from a girlfriend. The ghost of her notorious gangster cousin followed her up the ranks, his name popping up in conversations with colleagues and in interviews with higher-ups. At some point before she left the force, Kelly looked up Stuart John Regan's extensive criminal history and found it on microfilm. But years later, when she decided to delve deeper into her family's past, she was told that criminal history, said to fill 10 boxes, was missing. After months of back and forth with the New South Wales Police Unsolved Homicide Unit, and perhaps when it became evident Kelly wasn't going away, an expert archivist located the records attached to another matter where Regan was a person of interest.
I've read through it, there's some interesting stuff in there, a lot of stealing, a lot of traffic offences, absolutely no charges for murder. There is charges in there for rape and a lot of drop charges, which I find interesting.
Kelly's search for coronial documents from a 1977 inquest into Johnny Regan's murder was equally fraught. Statements made by more than 100 witnesses before the introduction of digital archives, as well as ballistic reports and bank and real estate records, had also vanished. Here's how the New South Wales Coroner's Court explained it. We've used AI to bring this correspondence to life.
It appears the file was retrieved at some previous time in the past, along with some other files, and then refiled with another/other files instead of being returned to its correct location.
Though it's not immediately clear where the records were found, they also eventually landed in Kelly's inbox.
Thank God. This is the mother lode. I'm grateful to those that helped us get there. Obviously, they've gone through a hell of a lot of boxes.
Well, she's been astonishing. But the very first time I ever met Kelly in person, I just knew this woman was an investigator to be reckoned with. She is absolutely no nonsense. She does not take no for an answer. Kelly is a force of nature. And I was in total admiration at how she was utterly relentless and how she managed to be told that documents have been completely lost, and 2 years of still banging on the door for portions of files to bob to the surface because of Kelly changed the shape of the investigation itself and gave us a much greater and fuller picture than we might have had. So I credit her extraordinary personality, perseverance and muscle in many respects with that success.
Matthew Condon is a senior reporter with The Australian and the host of the Gangster's Ghost podcast. Subscribers hear new episodes first at gangstersghost.com.au. And remember, you can access all the nation's best journalism anytime at theaustralian.com.au.